Thank you for choosing to watch our video about vetting your leads and making sure you are buying compliant leads for the Medicare market. My name is Olivia Richardson, one of the executive sales directors here at Senior Marketing Specialist, and today I get the pleasure of having a conversation with McNerney Management Group's compliance officer, Mr. Chalen Jackson. So good morning, Chalen.
Good morning, Olivia.
So Chalen, if you don't mind letting me know kind of what's going on right now, that there's a lot of discussion about the compliance behind leads.
So as we know, during the pandemic, there was a huge uptick in telesales for Medicare. Everyone was staying home. They maybe weren't able to go to their local agent's office. Agents were struggling with technology. So the folks that were early adopters and had some of the technology figured out just exploded. They had huge years. Unfortunately, the side effect of that is we also saw between 2020 and 2021 a 250% increase in complaints to Medicare.
Man, that's wild.
Absolutely. So because of that, there have been a lot of discussions about leads compliance, about sales compliance, and as we've already seen through updates to the Medicare Communication and Marketing Guidelines, some things in the 2023 proposed final rule for Medicare plans, there are a lot of changes coming. And the general sense is kind of a general crackdown on leads compliance.
And I think it's about time for that. For, like you said, a 250% increase in complaints shows that maybe these leads are being abused and not being cultivated correctly. And we wanted to talk about this specifically because a lot of the times the agents would say, well, I would just assume my lead vendor would know the rules, and that's not the case.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, a lead vendor has an obligation to provide their customers with an opportunity to have a conversation. That does not necessarily mean that they are also paying attention to exactly how that lead is generated.
Right.
They're not contracted with CMS or a carrier in most cases. They are just generating leads at a price people will buy. In many cases, there are a lot of vendors out there that do a fantastic job that can generate a lead compliantly. But there's always these fly-by-night organizations or folks that maybe aren't quite up to par, and you need to know what to look out for.
Well, again, I know we all hear it. We all talk about the Joe Namath advertising that the 1-800-Medicare or 1-800 Now. That's not an insurance carrier. Those are the lead generating software, lead generating commercial. And that's where we're seeing a lot of these repercussions.
Absolutely.
Is clearing up some of that. So we want to start out with, since it is the agent's responsibility for vetting these lead vendors, it's no longer the excuse of, well, I bought them from a reputable source. That doesn't cut it anymore. Because there's been so many updates, Chalen, as far as what lead vendors are responsible for, what are some questions that an agent needs to be asking their vendors before they participate in that lead program?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest things is asking for documentation. So we need to see that this lead vendor is looking to partner with you and provide you the documentation that you need to stay compliant on your end.
Sure.
So just like a scope of appointment or a copy of an application, if you're calling leads, we need to keep that lead card, that permission to contact on file for 10 years. So step one, make sure you can get a hold of a physical copy or a digital copy of that actual lead card. Another big thing is see if they offer some kind of compliance guarantee. I know there's certain lead vendors out there that will offer, almost a legal indemnity for any issues that arise because of a lead. There are vendors that will, make different other guarantees. So looking for something like that and reading through the fine print can also be really handy. And then making sure you can see what the actual advertisement is. If it's
which is the biggest hot button right now, especially with our internet leads or Facebook lead vendors. They're really not wanting to give up that information, and that can't really be okay anymore.
It really can't. And, I think that's the big thing to remember is there haven't actually been any major changes to the marketing guidelines. There's just a much finer microscope on the details. We've always needed to verify these things. It's just because of this uptick in compliance issues, it's coming under a lot more scrutiny. So at the end of the day, if someone will not show you the ads they're running to generate leads, don't buy them.
That's again, and again, just to kind of go off that documentation, a copy of what made that person click. We're talking to a lot of these internet and Facebook lead vendors, and they'll say, "Well, we'll show you the form they filled out."
Yep.
That you need that.
Absolutely.
But you also need what was it that made that person click yes.
Yep. And I think that's a good point that, as with everything that we do as agents, there's a lot of crossover between various federal entities. One thing that lead vendors have been really ahead of the curve on are things like TCPA and CAN-SPAM and some of the other federal regulatory agencies, making sure that they have maybe that trusted form certification to verify the legitimacy of that lead card or that online form. But again, if that person thinks they were clicking to enter to play Wheel of Fortune,
right,
it doesn't really matter if the form was valid.
Sure. So give us an example of what, I know something that you are very careful about, more so whenever an agent's marketing themselves, but still very valid whenever a lead vendor is marketing, prohibited language. I know that's a big hot button right now too. Give us some examples of what prohibited language would look like.
Absolutely. So some really common things would be looking for ads that don't have an appropriate disclaimer, knowing that this is an advertisement for insurance, that you will be contacted by an agent. That's probably the most common one that I see.
The little writing at the bottom of everything. You gotta have it. It's not free, but you gotta have it.
Gotta have it. Some of the common words like free is a really, that's a really common but very clearly prohibited word. Yeah, absolutely. So those are probably the two most common. There's lots of nuance, lots of things you can and can't do, and that kind of float the line between needing to be CMS approved and not needing to be approved. But as far as two big clear examples, the disclaimer and using that free language.
Got it. So let's move on let's get a little bit more specific because not every type of lead works for every type of agent.
Absolutely.
So let's kind of break down what really specifically you need to know about each type of lead. Let's start with the good old-fashioned, old reliable mailers. What do people need to know compliance-wise when it comes to buying mailers from a mail house?
Sure. So there's actually a lot of things. The biggest one, as we've already said, make sure you can see that ad. And the reason for that is to verify, what is this actually advertising? Is it advertising Medicare Advantage benefits? Is it something that may need CMS approval? And if it does need approval, does it have that code on the bottom that shows that it has been submitted to CMS and has been approved? And if not, is the lead vendor willing to work with you to get it approved? Because if it does contain that kind of content and you send it out, 5 years from now, Mrs. Jones has a problem with her Medicare Advantage plan and complains, one of the first things that the carrier is going to ask for is, how did you first come into contact with Mrs. Jones?
Yeah, so the documentation on everything. Absolutely. The CRM becomes so important from here on out.
That's the biggest thing I would tell agents is the ability to have long-term document storage digitally or physically is probably the biggest gap in most agents' plan right now.
Makes sense. Awesome. So what about, again, talking about with online leads? We've kind of picked on them because I think a lot of these CMS updates really targeted the online internet commercial style leads. So what do we need to ask our online lead vendors?
Yep. So very similarly, it's going to be mostly about that content. What is that person seeing? Where are they clicking it? If it's placement ads or Facebook ads, we want to make sure that it's not using not only prohibited language, but also asking prohibited questions.
Sure.
So for example, not asking for date of birth on a Medicare Advantage lead. We can ask for age, but not date of birth.
Sure.
So, or making sure that we're not asking unnecessary health questions if it may be in a non-underwritten situation. Or a case where we're prohibited in asking those questions. Making sure that we're not inadvertently cross-selling final expense to an MA lead, or making sure that we're following the guidelines on how to bring up those conversations. So there's a lot of things we can do for online leads. I think the biggest thing is when they are actually putting in their information, what's that call to action? Is it an agent's going to call you? Is it you're going to get a free Medicare guide.
So you can't do like a bait and switch. Like, do this free guide, enter in this information, and not tell them that doing so will prompt a call from an agent.
Absolutely.
We see that a lot. Get the free guides, download here type deal.
And especially being extremely cautious about, a big one we've been seeing lately is the classic, we know that seniors are very interested in one of the top switching activities surrounds that dental, vision, and hearing benefit.
Sure.
But making very cautious that if you're buying an MA lead, not only is it compliant, but make sure that client knows what they're in for.
Makes sense.
There's a lot of folks that think they may be trying to get a standalone dental plan and not realizing that they're actually talking about changing their Medicare Advantage.
So just being very clear in that.
Absolutely.
One thing that we haven't, a lead type we haven't really touched on at all because it doesn't include physical papers, physical lead generating things, is going to be the telephonic lead generation,
Absolutely.
that cold calling. What do we ask for, which is gaining in popularity? So what do we need to ask our individuals who are doing telephonic leads?
Yep. So it's a little more complicated with telephonic leads.
Always.
Because you're basically taking part of that equation out of your hands. At the end of the day, if you're buying, say, a live transfer, there's someone in that lead vendor's office that is calling people and generating interest and then transferring it to you. And that's fantastic. So you obviously need to know what's that person saying. What's the script?
Sure.
What are they saying to get them on the phone with you? And then even more importantly, where are they getting information on people to call? Are they cold calling? That doesn't work if we're talking about Medicare Advantage or PDP. Are they in turn buying leads themselves? Are they doing direct mail or online leads? Where are they getting their leads for those people to call to generate live transfers?
Really find the origin of that.
We have to know kind of that origination point, and we have to have documentation of each step. So even if you're buying a live transfer, you really need not just the script they used, you need that call recording because that's going to be asked for if there's ever an issue. You need to know where they got that lead and the permission to contact they have for that person. So it's definitely a little more legwork.
Got it. And you would think because you're physically handling less stuff that it would be less work, because that's a really interesting concept as well.
Yeah.
Last but not least, what if somebody decides, well, I'm not even going to mess with all this compliance stuff that you're talking about. I'm going to do my own leads, whether that's cold calling or creating your own mailer, but they're getting the data from somewhere. So these data lists that people are talking about, is there compliance associated with those?
There absolutely can be. I think the biggest thing is if you're buying a list, make sure it's being, especially if you're calling, make sure you're scrubbing against the do not call list.
Sure.
Most of these data vendors are going to give you a kind of a courtesy scrub when they sell you the list. But a lot of folks don't realize or aren't familiar, those do need scrubbed every 30 days, both nationally and at the state level.
Wow.
And that can get pretty expensive. There's services out there that can scrub that for you for a kind of a monthly fee type situation, but actually subscribing to those registries yourself can be very expensive. I know here in Missouri, it would cost an individual around $600 a year just to subscribe to the do not call list for Missouri.
And again, you can't just buy a list and just work that. If it's thousands and thousands of names, one person can't hit that all the time. But every 30 days, that one list that you bought would have to be rescrubbed.
Have to be rescrubbed. And then the other thing is making sure you're cautious about what you're pitching them. It gets really tricky if you're cold calling and someone is perhaps the better fit for them is a Medicare Advantage plan. Since that still originated as a cold call, that puts everyone in a really tough situation.
Sure, absolutely.
Not that it's impossible or insurmountable, but that's just something to be cautious of when you think about what your conversations you're having, what you're pitching. You never want that bait and switch. We definitely want to save those phone recordings. And even if you're doing direct mail, same rules apply. Check your content, send it to us to be reviewed. Send it to CMS if necessary, which we can help with that as well. But we just want to make sure that everyone's getting leads in an appropriate manner so that they can not only have sales success, but also not set themselves up for problems down the road.
Because we know that it's not going to be your clients that turn you in, it's the competition. So the more successful you are in this industry, the more eyes you're going to have on you. Not only that, but just volume. You write more business, there's going to be more complaints, not whether they're real or whether they're an agent or consumer just having a question. So you're just making sure you cross your T's, dot your I's, make sure you're doing everything by the book. So Chalen, last thing I want to ask you, what are some resources that senior marketing specialists can offer a person to make sure they're staying compliant, other than just everybody calling you directly?
Yeah, let's please not do that. But absolutely reach out if you do have questions. You can always call or email us. The agent resources team has a lot of great information on compliance as well. And then you'll kind of escalate things as needed. But there are some pretty key resources out there. Of course, the Medicare Communication and Marketing Guidelines that are available from CMS gives you the basics of compliance in general. Obviously, carriers also have some of their own compliance guidelines, and that's something that doesn't get talked about enough.
Sure.
The CMS is kind of the base level rules. It doesn't mean each carrier can't also set their own additional compliance requirements. So making sure that you're checking the agent guide for any carriers that you're representing for additional information. There's also a lot of information in the Medicare Managed Care Manual, which is kind of the playbook for the plans that are administrating Medicare Advantage. It is an enthralling read, let me tell you.
I believe it.
But it does have some really pertinent information about the responsibilities that the plan has to administrate compliance, which then trickles down to agents.
Sure.
So those are probably the three biggest resources, in addition to reaching out to us, watching videos like this, and just getting feedback anytime you have questions.
Beautiful. So again, making sure that we could read all those documents yourself, or you could hang out with our nerd who does it for us on your behalf. So make sure, again, guys, if you do have any questions, call our office, 1-800-689-2800. Speak to our agent resources team, or of course, you can also submit some of your information if you're wanting to make sure it doesn't need to be something that's submitted to CMS, or is this something that I can get away with just making sure normal compliance is applied. So you can email our compliance team. What's the email address for that?
compliance@gowithmmg.com.
Perfect. So awesome. So thank you guys so much. Just a quick recap. Get proof of everything. Keep everything for 10 years. Make sure you have all the documentation, the lead. Always know how that lead was generated, and making sure that you can back up that information as well. And make sure you do have these open conversations with the vendors. It is not the vendor's responsibility to make sure they stay compliant. It is yours as the agent. Thank you guys so much. Make sure you like and subscribe to Senior Marketing Specialists on YouTube and share our content to make sure that we just kind of bring up the industry and make sure we're taking care of the senior demographic. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you next time.